So Konami have announced a Suikoden 2 anime, but how many of the 108 stars are going to make the cut? Well, in my humble opinion, not many. Maybe they'll try and get all 108 in some way, like just a brief flash of their face as the characters pass through whatever town they're in. But even that, I think, is going to be pretty ambitious. I've seen people talking about having episodes dedicated to certain character recruitment side quests, like Millie's whole thing, going into the woods and recruiting her stupid pet. You think they're going to go off and do the whole unicorn thing with Hicks and Tengar? Obviously not. Or they shouldn't, at least. Otherwise, the whole series is going to be so bloated with guff that just isn't related to the main plot at all and that doesn't drive the main story forward. And Lord knows there's enough of the main story that it doesn't need any of that filler. So today I'm going to talk about how I would write the Suikoden anime. So to begin with, having talked a lot in the intro about how loads of stuff is going to need to be cut, we're going to start with something that is basically going to play out exactly as it is in the game because it's perfect. And I'm of course talking about the very beginning. This is such a perfect start to the game and would be to the anime series as well. We have Ryu and Joey talking about how they're keen to get back to Kiara and see Nanami. We will have a couple of mentions of Nanami thrown in there, meet a couple of the other sort of NPCs in the camp, really set the vibe that these kids are excited to get home to their families after having been away training for the army in the youth brigade for a while. And then of course overnight the axe falls, everything's burned to the ground and everyone's slaughtered. We get an introduction to Raud as a horrible villain. We get introduced to Luca Blight as an even horribler villain. And then Joey and Ryu will get to do some cool anime fights against some soldiers maybe, before escaping over the cliff. So I imagine that being maybe a 4 or 5 minute prologue scene, and then a minute and a half title sequence, and we're away, we're into the series. So here I'll just mention, when I say this is how I would write the series, I'm not going to write it out line by line. I'm not writing a full script here. I'm talking broad strokes, what scenes make it in, what scenes need to change, what characters make it in, what characters don't, and how the story can all come together to form a pleasing narrative in this completely new storytelling medium. That said, we come out of the title sequence, of course, with Victor and Flick finding Ryu in the river and pulling him out. Now this is where things are going to start to change, because in the game, what you get at this point is a bunch of chores, right? You get pushing the boxes up against the wall. You then have to go to Ryubi to get flour with Gengen and Tuta. Then you come back and clean up a bunch of oil spills, and then Joey comes to rescue you. Now these chores serve a real purpose in the game. They get the player familiar with running around, interacting with the world, going out onto the world map, visiting other towns, visiting shops, seeing other characters out and about in the world, and they give the player a feel for what they're in for the rest of the game. But the exploration element is a very video gamey thing. The viewer of an anime doesn't have agency of deciding they're going to wander out onto the world map and visit the local towns. So this is where I think the first set of changes is going to need to come in. I don't think Gengen and Tuta make the cut, but I do think it's important that we have some time in the fort getting to know the people that we're surrounded by, namely Victor and Flick. And I think Pol should be fleshed out a little more, because as we know, Pol's gonna die in a couple episodes' time. So we really want to feel a connection with him. We want to feel like we know him and like he's a friend. We also want to get to know a bit more about Victor and Flick. In the game, you've got freedom to wander around and you can go and chat to them up in their rooms and stuff. But in the anime, you can't just have the main character aimlessly wandering around and just going for a chit-chat with no real narrative drive. So we're gonna need to restructure this segment where Ryu's being given chores and tasks to do around the fort. I do think it's important that we spend that bit of time in the fort, but in a way that actually drives the narrative forward and builds up some of the key characters around us. And so through the chores that we see Ryu doing, we should be getting little sort of character vignettes of Victor and Flick and the soldiers around the fort's opinion of them, how they're regarded. Side note, I also think Leona should stay as a character because I think she kind of ties the whole place together really well. As the kind of proprietor of the tavern, the mess hall type area, she's the one in charge of that, and I think that's a really nice character to have. So we can have something like Ryu helping carry firewood or water into the kitchen. He has a moment with a background soldier who's lost family in the war, so we're world building, telling the viewer that there's an ongoing war and that everyone's really keen for it to end. While Ryu's doing his chores, maybe he is doing the oil cleaning thing. While he's doing so, he sees Victor out training with others. We get a glimpse at Flick writing letters or studying maps up in his study or something. The point is that these chores no longer have the video gamey purpose that that they have in the game, which is introducing the player to a lot of the sort of exploration and interaction mechanics of the game. They need to serve another purpose for this new medium, and sadly, I don't think Gengen and Tuta really factor into that. Then after that scene, we have the arrival of Joey. Joey arrives, busts Ryu out of his cell with his weapon and says, "Come on, we're escaping." So Ryu's like, damn, okay, cool. This can pretty much play out as it does in the game. It's a very story-based moment of the game. Joey tries to break Ryu out of prison. They immediately get caught. Flick and a bunch of soldiers surround them on the ground floor of the fort and say, "Nice try, you're not going anywhere." That then gives us an opportunity for a nice scene between Ryu, Joey, Victor, and Flick, where Ryu and Joey talk through what happened in the prologue. Not extensively, because the viewer saw it, so we don't need that much repeated. But we can have Victor and Flick exchanging knowing glances, like this is bigger than they first thought. They could have one of them mention the peace treaty that's supposed to be coming through and how they're confused and upset about why that's just being thrown away. Acknowledgement of Luca Blight's ruthlessness. Then they get put back in their cell. Maybe they fix the lock, put a temporary padlock on it or something, I don't know. And so Paul will be the one who puts them back in their cell. Maybe he can have a little line, something that lets us know that Paul's become fond of Ryu and that he hopes he doesn't try and escape again, because Paul, Victor, and Flick all probably suspect that Ryu and Joey are going to be hunted down by Highland if they try and go back there. Then once Ryu and Joey are left in their cell, we can have a little conversation between them. And this is where it's going to get interesting, because obviously in the game, Ryu is a silent protagonist, and you can't have a silent protagonist in the anime. So he could be a little bit sort of withdrawn and keep to himself, but he can't just be silent and have everyone else making decisions around him. He needs to have some agency if he's going to be the hero of this story. So this is where I think Ryu says something like, "Paul's right, but we can't just stay around here waiting for them to decide our fate." And then Ryu's the one to decide, "We're breaking out again tonight." In the game, it's Joey, but in the anime, I think it should be Ryu who says that, because that shows a real moment of agency from him and that he's becoming the hero of the story. So in the middle of the night, they manage to pick the lock. In the game, they do it with the spoon that Paul brings them. I'm not sure exactly the mechanics of how they manage to pick the lock, but whatever. They get out of the cell, and I considered where episode 1 should end. Initially, when I was thinking this through, I thought episode 1 should end when Victor and Flick rescue Joey and Ryu from being executed up in Highland, but that turns out to be so much stuff to cram into episode 1. That's just not achievable at all. That's way too much. So I think an endpoint that makes sense for episode 1 would be when Joey and Ryu properly escape the fort and flee into the night. Now, what that means, if that's going to be the end of episode 1, is that escape needs to have a little more climax to it than it does in the game. Because in the game, they just kind of quietly slip out and then you're free, and then you go and explore the world map and you go to Ryubi and meet the circus gang and all of that. But if this is going to be the end of episode 1, that means we need some kind of climax to be the end of the episode. And I think that should come in some kind of confrontation at the gates of the fort. And the person I think it should be with is not Victor or Flick, because they would probably have men with them. They would just recapture them and it would just be a repeat of their previous escape attempt. I think it should be Paul. And maybe in the anime, Paul is a little more of a soldier than he is in the game. In the game, he's just kind of a janitor almost, like a caretaker. But at the end of the day, he's working at a mercenary fort. He probably knows his way around a little bit of combat. Now, I don't know if they should fight exactly, but Paul's determined that the best thing for these two is for them to stay here and that they will be in danger if they escape back to Highland. And he thought they were going to try and escape again, so he waited at the gate or like in the trees to the side and steps out and says, "Please don't leave." And there could either be an emotional moment there between them and this person who's been put in charge of them and their well-being and who has come to just want what's best for them, where Ryu and Joey ignore him and go anyway. Or maybe he physically tries to stop them and we get a little anime fight at the gates where they overpower Paul, not to the point where they do him any serious injury, but they put him on his ass. They feel bad about it, and then they leave. And that could provide a nice moment of climax for the end of episode 1, Ryu and Joey escaping into the night. Let's go over my thoughts for episode 2, because I think episode 2 would be pretty much as per the game. We open with Ryu and Joey having just escaped the fort, arriving at the nearest town, which is Ryubi. Ryubi. Whatever. And of course there we get the circus gang, Ailey, Rina, and Bolgan. Do we want to have a romantic side plot between Ailey and Ryu? In the game it's kind of hinted at. It's hinted that Ailey kind of likes Ryu and is interested in him, but Ryu's a silent protagonist and he just stands there kind of dumbstruck by it going, ooh, I don't know. And nothing really ever comes of it. But I think if we are going to introduce the idea that Ailey kind of likes Ryu in the anime, it probably does need to be developed as the story goes on. They don't necessarily need to get together exactly, but I think it would need a little more development than it gets in the game. The two groups meet, they realize they're both headed the same way, and they agree to cross the mountain together. We of course get the iconic scene with Rina having her adult conversation with the guard at the base of the mountain so that he agrees to let them through, and then they travel over the mountain, and this is where we can have some character stuff. And this, we don't want too much traveling. Maybe there can be a sense of danger with the mists creeping in, but they shouldn't just be fighting a bunch of random stuff as they go up the mountain. That doesn't add anything. We are going to introduce the idea of Ailey liking Ryu and there potentially being a bit of a romantic sub-story there, then this is where that can begin. And at the end, the mists come together and form the mist monster, and then we get a big cool anime fight with the mist monster. I think that should happen. And when thinking about where this episode should end, it's similar to episode 1, I thought that, okay, episode 2 can end with Victor and Flick rescuing them from Highland. But even that, going from arriving at Ruby and meeting the circus gang all the way to that, is still a lot. And so I think episode 2 should be arrival at Ruby, meeting the circus gang, traversing the mountain with some nice character stuff along the way, big anime fight with the mist monster, and meanwhile we can have a B plot maybe cutting back to the fort with Victor and Flick and Pol realizing that they're gone, and some discussion between them about what they should do. And that's where we can build up Pol's character a little more for that bigger emotional impact when Luca kills him later on, because Pol can be convinced that they're going to be in danger and they go back to Highland. He can be convincing Victor and Flick to take some action to try and help them, which will provide some nice foreshadowing for when they do help them in what will be the next episode. And so I think between the hero's journey, meeting the circus gang over the mountain, fight with Mist Monster, intercut with some stuff back at the fort between Victor and Flick and Pol, and puzzling over what to do about the fact that Ryu and Joey have escaped, will make a nice episode with plenty in it to be working with. Then we're on to episode 3, and this is the last episode I'm going to talk through in this video. If you want me to carry on and go into future episodes, let me know, because I'm enjoying this. And the deeper we get into the series, the more characters and scenes there are going to be that we're going to need to decide whether they make the cut or not. So episode 3 begins with the gang, Ryu, Joey, Ailey, Rina, and Bolgan, arriving at Kiara and going their separate ways. Ryu goes off to his old house, and we get the introduction to Nanami with her praying over Genkaku's grave and excited that Ryu's back, but saying there's talk about city-state spies, and is that Ryu and Joey? Basically, that introduction to Nanami, in my opinion, can happen exactly how it happens in the game. Most of the core story moments, I'm probably not changing too much. I just think that there's a lot of fat around them that needs to be trimmed right down. So we get a nice big emotional reunion with Nanami, a little scene by Genkaku's grave. They can have a talk in the house. We get a real sense of home, familiarity, and comfort with Ryu arriving back at their house, but it's short-lived when Raud arrives with the soldiers. Nice, cool anime fight with Raud and the soldiers, but as we know, Nanami and Ryu are not able to fight them off, and they're captured. We then jump over to Joey, who's basically turned away from his family home and also captured by soldiers, and they're then thrown into a cell. In the game, we get a little villain's monologue from Raud while they're in the cell, and maybe we could get something similar in the anime as well, just so we understand a bit about where Raud is coming from, about his motives, why he did what he did, why he agreed for his company, the Youth Brigade, to just be massacred. And that helps fully explain to the viewer, as it does to the player in the game, exactly why Ryu and Joey are being hunted and put to death, and why it's being said that they're spies. We then move on to the execution scene, which in the game is a little bit weird because they're up on gallows with nooses around their necks, yet there are people behind them beating them with clubs. Never heard of a hanging where the victim is clubbed and beaten before being dropped. Feels a little bit redundant. Unnecessarily cruel, you know? But I guess it helps establish Highland as the bad guy, so maybe they do it in the anime as well. Anyway, as we know, as the execution scene is being carried out, Victor and Flick suddenly arrive to save the day, and with what we discussed in episode 2, that has been nicely foreshadowed. Now we know Victor and Flick really are good guys. They really are going to be some key heroes in the story. Now, you may have noticed there is a character that I haven't mentioned, a certain squirrel that they find in a tree by their house. Now, should he be included? I feel like fun little pet friend would be great, but it is so silly during this rescue scene in particular how Maku Maku is with Nanami. When you go back and rescue Nanami, it's so ridiculous. in a very video gamey sort of way, and it's fine. You forgive it because it's a video game, but like that will need some rethinking in this format. That said, I do think Maku Maku being there on, you know, Ryu's shoulder, like Pikachu style, could be great. It's not going to add a whole lot to the story because, you know, Maku Maku doesn't have any dialogue or anything, but that's one of those things that also isn't really going to take a lot of time to set up and establish. I think having a little cuddly squirrel buddy is very anime and would probably be good. Definitely some good merch opportunities, so I can see Konami doing it. Anyway, back to the rescue. Victor and Flick rescue Hiro and Joey. They then go and get Nanami out of prison, and that's probably going to be the whole sort of final third of this episode, is lots of cool anime fighting, Victor and Flick busting them out of their incarceration and then breaking out of wherever they're being held, rescuing Nanami along the way. All of that lends itself really well to some very cool anime sequences. And so that's the end of episode 3. And as we move forward, we've got decisions about, obviously we need to have Luca Blight sacking the town and doing the die pig die scene, but do we have that as well as Toto being sacked? Do we combine them into one to keep things tight because having both might feel a little repetitive? When they flee to Muse, do we do the whole Sindar ruins thing? But I would quite like to kind of methodically work through the episodes like this for the whole series. Decide what gets cut, what gets kept, what characters are in it and when. For these first 3 episodes, we're pretty true to the game. We've cut Gengen and Tuta down to cameos at most. We're not doing the chores as they happened. But apart from that, we're pretty much scene for scene with the game so far. But as we get deeper and deeper, there's going to be more scenes, especially with optional side quests to recruit characters. I'll be honest, if a character is not one of the story characters that automatically joins as you play through, if they're an optional Star of Destiny, in my opinion, they're pretty much not making the cut. That's a waste of screen time, it's a waste of the viewer's time, in my opinion. But the question is, what do you think? If you're a fan of the game, I'm sure you've got thoughts on what should be in the anime. And do you agree with my takes, or do you think I'm an idiot? I'd really love to know, so drop your thoughts in the comments. I can't lie, while I was editing this video, I thought of at least 2 things that I wanted to include and mention, but I just forgot, so that'll have to wait till next time now. Anyway, let me know what you think, and whether or not I should continue this series. Hopefully see you next time.